Welcome back to Thinking Readers, where children listen to stories and learn to think. Today is day 14 of our story advent calendar. Yesterday, we read the first 10 chapters of The Wild Robot. We noticed that the chapters were so short and seemed to mirror the way in which Roz was taking in all the new information about her world and processing it. We also talked about the effect of the narrator referring to Roz as our robot. I left you with the question, how do you feel about living in a world with humanoid robots? It is something that's in development right now and will take a few years to really become commonplace. But there will be a time when humanoid robots are doing some of the tasks for us. And I told Donkey that I found this really exciting. I really love these new developments in artificial intelligence and all the opportunities that they're going to bring to our world. Did you manage to think about this and share your ideas with a parent, pet or a toy? I imagine that we're going to be having quite a lot of conversations about this in the future. Before we start today, I just want to give a shout out to a young man who's been watching every single one of our podcasts since we started our story advent calendar. Ranulph, who's watching in Sao Paulo, Brazil with his dad. Hi Ranulph, I'm so glad that you're enjoying our story advent calendar and I hope that you will continue to enjoy it all the way up to Christmas Day. Now I have something different for you today. I have a narrative poem and it's from a collection called When We Were Very Young by A. Milne. The poem is called The King's Breakfast. Have a look at a little illustration from the top of the poem to give you an indication about what this poem's going to be about. I think the illustration might help you. Let's get reading. The King's Breakfast. The King asked the Queen, and the Queen asked the dairymaid, "Could we have some butter for the royal slice of bread?" The Queen asked the dairymaid. The dairymaid said, "Certainly, I'll go and tell the cow now afore she goes to bed." The dairymaid, she curtsied and went and told the Alderney, "Don't forget the butter for the royal slice of bread." The Alderney said sleepily, "Oh, you'd better tell His Majesty that many people nowadays like marmalade instead." The dairymaid said, "Fancy," and went to Her Majesty. She curtsied to the Queen and she turned a little red. "Excuse me, Your Majesty, for taking the liberty, but marmalade is tasty if it's very thickly spread." The Queen said, "Oh," and went to His Majesty. Talking of the butter for the royal slice of bread, many people think that marmalade is nicer. Would you like to try a little marmalade instead? The King said, "Bother." And then he said, "Oh, dear me." The King sobbed, "Oh, dearie me," and went back to bed. "Nobody," he whimpered, "could call me a fussy man. I only want a little bit of butter for my bread." The Queen said, "There, there," and went to the dairymaid. The dairymaid said, "There, there," and went to the shed. The cow said, "There, there, I didn't really mean it. Here's milk for his porringer and butter for his bread." The Queen took the butter and brought it to His Majesty. The King said, "Butter, eh?" and bounced out of bed. "Nobody," he said as he kissed her tenderly. "Nobody," he said as he slid down the banisters. "Nobody, my darling, could call me a fussy man. But I do like a little bit of butter for my bread." Let's summarise. I'm going to put up my 4 fingers and you're going to populate the different categories. The King is in his palace, and the problem is that the Alderney is too tired to make any butter for the King's bread. so he sulks and goes to bed. The Alderney is persuaded to make butter for the king, and he's happy again. Very simple story. Now, do you have an idea of what a king is like? Can you think about a king? What about King Charles? Keep that image of a king in your mind. Now, how does this king in this poem differ from your notion of a king? In what ways does he differ? Think about some of the things he says and does. When he's told that he can't have butter, what about marmalade? How does he react? Do you remember the word the poet uses? He whimpers. Is this a word that you would associate with a king? Whimpering denotes something small and feeble, whereas a king is the ruler of a country. How else does this king act? When he doesn't get his butter, what does he do? He goes back to bed. Is that a kingly thing to do when you face a problem? What else does he do? At the end of the poem, when he's overjoyed, he slides down the banister. How does that sit with your idea of how a king behaves? This is a funny poem. In a sort of a way, the poet is making fun of this king. The metered rhyme, did you notice that there was a rhyme to this poem? And the pace at which the poem moves, because of the rhythm of the sentences, is quite jaunty, quite fun. And this sort of underpins this sort of funny, humorous look at the king, that he's a different sort of king than we're used to. There are other techniques that the poet does to sort of show the ridiculous nature of this king. So at the very end, he repeats to his wife when he finds out that butter's on the table. Nobody, he said as he kissed her tenderly. Nobody, he said as he slid down the banisters. Nobody, my darling, could call me a fussy man. He repeats nobody 3 times. We call that a tricolon, when he's emphasising something by saying it 3 times. Now, this gives importance to something. If you say something 3 times, it sticks in someone's mind. It's very memorable and it gives emphasis. But what is it giving emphasis to? The fact he likes butter on his bread. This is quite a trivial matter, isn't it? This is not a stately matter. This is something, that a king probably shouldn't be concerned with. So the writer is slightly sending up this character, making them look a little bit ridiculous. A. Milne creates a hierarchy. He's got the king asking the queen asking the dairymaid, and the dairymaid asking the Alderney. Who has the power in this poem? Who has the ability to make the king happy? Isn't that a little bit of irony? That the cow is the most powerful character in the poem. We've mentioned before on this podcast that writers will often reflect the times in which they're writing. And actually, this poem is written after the First World War, when marmalade became really popular. And it's reflecting that idea that the king wants to hold on to his butter, but actually times might be moving on and people are trying new things. Now, this is called a narrative poem because often poetry will be a contemplation, a reflection on something, or a beautiful image of something. But this poem is telling a story. So it works as a story to have a beginning, middle, and end, have a problem and a resolution. And so that's why I've included it in our story advent calendar. I hope that you enjoyed it and it gave you something a little bit different today. A final thought. In what way does telling this story in poetry form add something extra? How is it an advantage to tell this story in a poem instead of, say, a short story? Have a think about some of the things that we talked about and maybe some other ideas of your own, and see why you think that this form of poetry was a good way to tell this story. That's it for today, but I look forward to seeing you tomorrow for day 15 of our Story Advent Calendar. Goodbye.